you were telling me about your PhD and the work you were doing, in particular focused on child nutrition.
Yeah.
We're really interested if you could tell me a little bit more about that and some of the things that sort of came out of that study that you found really interesting.
Okay. Anyway, I would really like to actually come out with at least 4 key topics or things that have been published out of that paper. But one important paper that actually I published, which I'm really happy about, is the paper on community characteristics. So it was the title of it is how important are community characteristics on child nutrition status in Malawi. So the main objective was just to study. Anyway, we know a lot of things at household level that influence children's nutritional status, like mother education level, the income status of the household, access to water, and the other factors at child level as well, like even the age of the child, sex of the child, the birth signs, the signs at birth of the child are important factors that influence children's nutritional status. So here I'm looking at children under the age of 5, but then the topic of community characteristics was not a topic which has been studied quite a lot. So this was quite an interesting topic to look at. So we looked at things like access to water at a community level, access to markets, and interestingly, we also had access to data on how communities trace their descendants. So interestingly, how communities trace their descendants came out as a significant factor that actually can tell us why some communities have children that are undernourished more compared to other communities. So it turned out that communities that trace their descendants through the mother, these are matrilineal communities, children from those communities are more likely to be stunted. So stunting is having a low height for your age. So they're more likely to be stunted compared to children from communities that trace their descendants through the father. But looking deep through that, actually what we're talking about are the differences in the households in these communities. So communities that trace their descendants through the mother are most likely to have female-headed households. So which more likely something that you would call as single parent households are very common. But in the case of Malawi, the single parents is mostly female-headed households, so it's just the woman and the children. And so there's a socio-economic element associated with that, because these female-headed households, they're on their own. So economically, they're less well off compared to matrilineal households, where most likely they're going to be married. The culture of the matrilineal society is a culture that promotes marriage and encourages marriage. Whilst the matrilineal society, there's a lot of dominance of the woman, and there's a lot of divorce that goes on in matrilineal societies. So although that brings autonomy to the woman, the disadvantage that most likely it's just the woman who's available at the house to look after the children. So economically, they are less well off, but social as well in terms of taking care of the children, sharing the responsibilities and giving advice on that. The matrilineal house was less well off. And the other thing was education as well. Just anyway, maybe you might be aware of the fact that most of the developing countries, Malawi including, education levels are much lower amongst women, and so the matrilineal societies tend to suffer. So because of lower levels of education, it means their employment status also is much lower in terms of they're less likely to be employed in very good jobs, and that brings in the other dimension of the disadvantage as well.
So there's a number of factors that sort of compound the problem, but what you were saying about the way that people trace their lineage is a fascinating aspect that I hadn't heard about before.
Okay.
And I'm interested to know whether that's something unique in Malawi or particularly prevalent in Malawi. I don't know what proportion of households are matrilineal in that regard. So,
I think it's pretty common, I think, in African societies. In Malawi, we do have a larger proportion of matrilineal communities compared to patrilineal communities. Okay, so the northern part of Malawi, mostly you have nearly all of the districts there are tracing their descendants through their father, and they are the kind of societies where they practice bride price. So basically, at marriage, the woman will go and stay at the husband's house and live there, and the parents of the woman are expected. Anyway, the husband is supposed to pay the parents of the woman some money, or previously it used to be cows, yeah, which is seen to be as like a thank you for raising the child, but then now we're taking over the child, then this is a thank you. Yeah, but that seems to be an element that also, it ensures the marriage, that the marriage doesn't break, because if you want to leave, it means you have to give back somehow, you know. So maybe that's an element that also ensures that marriage stay for longer in patrilineal communities. Yeah, but it's a lesser proportion compared to matrilineal.
and so in the southern part of Malawi, it's a very different situation by the sounds of it.
Yeah, southern and most of the central. So we have 3 regions. We have just, north, central, and south. Yeah, so the southern region, the central region is matrilineal, and there's just a small portion of the southern region that actually is patrilineal. Just a small. You know, there's just a mixture of 2 tribes. Yeah. Yes.
And with a finding like that, which seems to be really an important thing to sort of make people aware of, what are the implications of that for practitioners and policymakers? What should they be doing?
I know, it's in terms of conclusion and recommendation, I just focus on things that can be done, like education, you know. I know if you look at the developed society, like here in the UK, if mothers are not happy with their marriage or their relationship, they ditch out their partner, they stay on their own, the government comes in to support single parents. But for a poor country like Malawi, we don't have that. So basically, but as a woman, if you're educated, you are able to support yourself. So the only emphasis that I was able, which was more practical, was to emphasize education and to focus, especially in all regions, but also looking particular focus on this the southern region and the central region. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And more recently, since you've been at the University of Portsmouth, you've been kind of expanding your research interests and been doing more work with different data sets. And it's really interesting also perhaps to say a little bit about that and what you're doing now.
Okay, thank you. So I'm doing at the moment, following up on what I did in my PhD, looking a little bit more on the children that are undernourished and the factors that influence them. But I'm also looking at the issue that we are working together with Tamsin and the Global Africa, looking at the effects of migration and urbanization on cultural practices. So investigating what impact does movement from developing country to developed has on change of culture, issues of bride price and the perception towards that. But more specifically, in Malawi, my interest is to make a comparison between rural women and urban women using the Malawi Demographic and Health Survey data of 2015, which is the latest data set, to make a comparison on their perception and experiences of domestic violence. And apart from just making that a rural-urban comparison, I also want to look at ethnicity. So we have, as I talked about, the matrilineal and patrilineal. Embedded within that, we also have tribes. And there are some differences on how women actually perceive what is domestic violence, the acceptance of domestic violence, and just to see if there are any patterns that can be deduced from there, and whether there could be any policy recommendations that can be made in terms of which areas should be targeted, what are the key things that should be looked at by policymakers with respect to domestic violence.
And is this a work in progress?
This is work in progress. So, but it's the good thing is it's desk work. I've got the data set. I've started looking at it, and my hope is I will focus more on this work after the teaching finishes, like in March. Then I can bury my head into it.
So I don't know if there's anything you can tell me about what's coming out of it now, or if that's something we should look forward to in your future publications.
I can't say at the moment anyway, it's just slightly. What I did was to make a comparison of matrilineal and patrilineal, and what was slightly, I'm not sure how significant it's going to come out, but I could see some slight differences with patrilineal communities, women perceiving things like domestic violence or things like being beaten by your husband, accepting that as okay, So there is more acceptance of some behaviors, how women should be treated, like being beaten or being shouted at, whatever. There's more acceptance in the patrilineal communities compared to matrilineal. So, but whether this is going to be a major thing that comes out as very, very significant, I'm yet to see, because at the moment I'm just doing by varied analysis, just looking at the percentages. But later on, I might, what I would want to do is do some regression analysis where I include so many other factors, and then see to what extent is ethnicity still, or tribe, still a significant factor in determining the perception by women on what can be said to be domestic violence.
And I guess perceptions and behaviours are things which change over time, so looking at your data at different points in time becomes important for this as well.
You're very right. But you'd expect some of things to change anyway over time, but maybe there should be something to actually influence that change. But some of these cultures and customs, especially in the rural villages, the chances of changing are very minimal. This is where I'm trying to see if maybe there are differences between urban and rural, because those in the urban areas are sort of like leading a different kind of life. They have access to television, media. They tend to associate with what they see on TV happening in the Western world as maybe this is what we should be doing as some kind of development. So that's the kind of things that I'm trying to investigate in terms of change, like moving into urban areas, maybe make that influence. And obviously education as well. The ones that are more educated, because they're more exposed to information, they have access to income, maybe they might have a different perception compared to those that are in the rural areas, are not educated. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Lana. That sounds really, really interesting. I look forward to reading more about that as you get further with that work.
Thank you very much. Thanks.